Welcome back to H-Lock Gaming. This week in Godforge, episode 14. For Tuesday's video, we have a bit of a skills showcase, so let's take a look. All right, the first thing we're going to look at is some dungeon stuff he shows off here. So from what I looked up, Broker, I'm not sure if that's correct how you say that, but anyways, he is known as the one who works with metal fragments. So I would assume that's going to be some materials you get to upgrade your weapons. All right, next to it, we have the workshop of Ptah, who is known as the god of craftsmen, architects, and creation. So again, probably some type of material you're going to get for upgrades. With creation being a thing, I don't know if you get materials there to make weapons or armor, because it seems like a forge would be where you would do that. Like I said, this guy right here is known as the one who works with metal pieces. He doesn't click on it, so maybe, well, he does click on dungeons before this, so we know it's a dungeon. So you're getting some type of material from at least these two right here, and actually probably this one. We'll get to that one in a second. All right, now we got at the end here, layer of Fafnir. As you see all the gold there, kind of gives you Smog vibes, and from what I looked up, Smog in the Lord of the Rings was based on him. And if you Google sort of his story, you'll find out that he killed his father to get all his gold. I assume this is a gold dungeon here. And then next to that, we got Svarog's Horde. He's also known as a blacksmith. So you got a forge here, a craftsman here, and another blacksmith here. Assuming this is gold, we're going to have different resources to craft different things in these dungeons, I would assume. What? I'm not exactly sure. I'm guessing this is probably the weapon over here, broker, however you say it. And then Ptah, craftsmanship. I don't know, maybe that'll be stuff used to upgrade weapons or armor. And then, I don't know, he looks kind of like he has some jewels and stuff around him too, so I don't know what exactly it's gonna be, but I assume these are all resources. Okay, let's keep going, because then he actually clicks on the Ascension dungeon, so we can see that a little. And here, this just looks like we're going to have a different dungeon for every faction, so you'll get some type of material you need, I assume, to ascend those heroes. All right, let's take a look at the skills now. All right, I'm going to play this part real quick, because it's applicable to my Godforge April Leaks Part 2, the very end part where I kind of summarize how Dirk builds this skill, and I was wondering, or I mentioned they have meetings, where they have to talk about how this skill is built. That is sort of what's going on here. Simon said they will give them usually 2 to 3 pictures or art concepts that kind of show how they want this skill to be built, and then the VFX artist will build the skill based on that. All right, let's take a look at the skills now that we see in this video. All right, first up here we have Icarus's basic attack. He is a rare, so keep that in mind in terms of how much detail and quality we're actually seeing in this skill. Pay attention to the arrow after it's fired, sort of the energy around it, and then when it hits this individual at the end, it's pretty spectacular if you think about this is just a rare. This isn't even an epic or a legendary, and they got this amount of detail. Okay, this is Osiris's ultimate skill. He is a legendary, so you can see the difference if you go back a few seconds and compare this to Icarus's skill, but both very high quality. But pay attention to this sort of magic moving up here. It almost flows to me kind of like lava or something. It doesn't look like lava, but sort of this like slow building ripple effect almost. Yeah, see, that doesn't really like zoom like you'd expect something liquid. It kind of has some friction to it, so it doesn't go out there, so it makes it feel, sort of heavier when it lands. All right, let's take a look at Odin's core ability. So that is not his basic or his ultimate. It's kind of in between them in terms of skill level, or not skill level, but power level, I guess you want to call it. You got basic, core, and ultimate. Those are sort of the tiers. but let's take a look. So those were Odin's ravens and his wolves attacking. So obviously a multi-targeted attack. There was only 3 people there, so if there was 4, would we see more? I guess we'll have to wait and see. All right, now we'll take a look at Odin's ultimate skill, which you saw before in the Friday leak. And as opposed to the skill that we just saw with 3, there is 4 people here, so this will hit 4 people. So that's kind of when I was wondering, does that previous skill hit everyone on the battle? You know, if there's 4, will it attack 4? Will we see 4 wolves? If there's 2, will we see 2? I guess we'll have to wait and see in the beta, but let's take a look again at this skill. All right, now we're going to check out some background physics that go on in the stages. Simon didn't say if they've decided specifically what will cause this to happen. He said, you know, if you do a certain set of events, maybe it crumbles, maybe when you unlock the reliquary. So depending on what they decide, you know, what triggers this could change. But either way, let's just keep an eye where my mouse is, sort of in the upper right corner, or rather where my mouse was, or Simon's. He'll play it again, so just keep an eye up there. There you go. All right, let's get to Thursday's podcast. All right, before we get to Thursday's podcast, we got a couple of short little videos. This is just some environment stuff they post on YouTube, but there is background music that I believe is game music, so let's take a look. All right, just a little quick sneak peek of all this stuff. I don't know if any of it's breakable, kind of like we saw at the end of the earlier section of this video, so we'll have to wait and see in beta. All right, let's take a look at a Discord leak. Okay, here they give us a preview of a campaign. I looked over here, I didn't see any new champs when they were scrolling through, but let's take a look. Wah wah. Apparently April Fools came a week late. I won't play the whole thing out, but the rest of it's just dancing. This looks to be like, I don't know, some type of 80s breakdance movie. Okay, let's get to Thursday's podcast. Okay, let's get into Thursday's podcast. All right, as always, we got Brad here, and this week, in addition to him, we have Sham and Dirk, and the gentleman all the way to the right in the red shirt is Dave, or Wizard D. Full disclosure, I've only really checked out his Godforge videos. I haven't really checked out his raid stuff, but he does cover that as well. He sounds pretty knowledgeable, so if you're interested in another raid creator, go ahead and check him out. All right, as always, they kind of ask him, you know, what's his content about, and he said he really likes breaking things down and making it more simple for people. And Sham uses the analogy of teaching, and it does seem like that's something he likes. You know, he says he likes comments where people say, oh, I finally get how defense is calculated or damage or etc. So sounds like, yeah, you could learn a lot if you watch his breakdown videos. Then Dave kind of talks about how they have to keep Godforge progressing but not make it too complex. You know, he's been playing Raid for a long time. He says, I don't know how people would really learn how to play the game quickly now with artifacts, and then you have Ascension, and then you have Blessings. He said there's just so much stuff that it's become so complex. So Fateless really needs to keep in mind the player that's going to join, you know, 2 to 3 years from now, as opposed to the player who's joining now. And Sham uses the analogy of, yeah, it's like how much data can you take in at one time? And I kind of thought of this like a textbook, like if you're thinking of a math textbook, you know, they give you the simpler concepts that eventually lead you to the more complex concepts. It's like if you jump into the book and there was no sense of organization, you just had everything at once, it would be very hard to learn that subject. So it does sound like they're very conscious of that. And then Dirk, sort of agreed with him and said, yeah, you can't make a game too mentally taxing. And this gets to a later point that him and Sham kind of both back up is you can't have the game feel like a chore. Then Dave talks about how, I forget what game it was. I think Summoner's Glory, he said, the events are just all the same. So they just come to feel like a chore. And he gave some examples of different ways you could change events, or maybe he did that later, but either way, he says that's really how you are going to keep people engaged. He said these games are all so similar. So he said, what's Fateless's new take on events? Or how do you change a fusion up so that people still feel interested and it's not the same thing over and over again? And then they talked about, that sort of balance of engagement and time. They're very conscious of people who only want to play 30 minutes a day, but then they're also conscious that people want to play 8 hours a day. They said that might actually be an entirely different podcast. How do they make a game that can satisfy both of that? And honestly, I don't know if you can. Be interesting to see what they think about it, though. And related to that, they said, these little like daily quests or rewards you get for doing things can't feel like a chore. I mean, they acknowledge that it's going to feel somewhat like a chore, but you can't make it so daunting that something you might want to do, you don't want to do now. And the example Dave uses, it would be cool if there was like an arena training area where you could play against other people in your clan to test other builds out, that might not be well known, just to see if you can come up with something, and you can chat to them or your whole clan while doing it, get some community engagement there. And Sham started to say we will have something like that, and he kind of goes off on a tangent and doesn't really get back to it, but he does make it sound like something is planned where you can at least interact in a practice mode with your clan or some group, so that we'll have a feature like that. Not everything will cost actual resources in the sense of energy or keys or whatever it's going to be. You can kind of play around with stuff and chat with people while you do it. So I'm very excited to hear about that, because that is something new we didn't know for sure was going to be in there. It's been talked about, but I don't think we had solid information up until now. Then they go on to talk about events again and said they don't want to overwhelm people with events, sort of like Polarium does, where it's like month after month you're doing these fusions and you feel like, oh, I'm going to miss out if I don't do it. So they said, one, they don't want to overwhelm people, so they want the events to be spread out more, it sounds like, than Polarium. But also, they don't want it to feel like FOMO. Like Dirk uses the example of playing Raid. You feel like you missed one, and then you might feel like, oh, I didn't get it done. Well, screw this game. That's gonna keep happening. I lost this, so it's putting me back on my account. I can never catch up. So they're very conscious of that feeling too, or FOMO as a lot of people call it. So they at least have that on their mind, how to not make that a thing in the game, it sounds like. And then related to that, when they're talking about events, Dirk does start laughing, him and Sham says, oh, spoilers, I don't know if it's a complete joke or not, but they talk about when Robin Hood pops into the game and he says you're going to be popping on your green tights and going into Sherwood Forest. So I don't know if that's kind of a dig at Simon. They did use his name when they said that, because, we've talked about in other videos and you've seen in these videos that people from the UK kind of think Robin Hood is a joke. He's not the folk hero he is here in the United States. So is that a leak? Is Robin Hood going to be in the game in some form or fashion? I guess we'll have to wait and see. Dave brought up events. So instead of doing like a fusion for a character, you could do a fusion for a weapon. And in that event, you'll get, say, I forget what level he used, but say you get the rare version of that weapon. He says then maybe we have a version of that where you get faction points, in the sense that you use everyone from a same faction, you get points when you do events, and you can win a better version of that weapon. I'm not sure if he meant on an individual basis or a clan basis, but that was kind of cool. So you could get, multiple copies of, a good weapon possibly, or maybe they would even do imprints that way. Sham was kind of digging the idea. Oh, and then they talked about too, it could be cool to have events where when you complete something, he used the example, Dave, that, maybe you do different events and you get essentially bricks that build up a pyramid. And then once you have that pyramid built on your account, you get, increased energy production. And then Chosen actually said, oh yeah, that could be cool though. But instead of like you permanently do it. He said maybe you win this tournament, then for a week you get like doubled energy production or something. So that could be kind of cool too. And then Dirk did give a bit of a spoiler here that said when you finish the tower, you will get a limited reward, like a limited time reward. I don't know what that is, but that does sound like it's account augmenting, whether that's more gold, more XP. I don't know, but it sounds like something like that. Then they asked Dave, what do they need to do and what shouldn't they do? And they kind of go back and talk about events have to feel fresh and new. So many of these games, the events just feel the same. And they've already talked about that, and I kind of summarized it. But he said, you can't exhaust the player in terms of time, and he used the example of packs. You can't just bombard them with packs where they feel like they have to buy these to compete. And if they're not buying them, they feel like, oh no, I can't compete or something along those lines. So he said, you have to have the balance of getting people to buy and the amount of time it takes. And again, here's when they talked about the 30 minutes a day player versus 9 hours a day. And at the very end, Dave actually asked, what kind of teasers might we see in game or Easter eggs, something like that. And they didn't really tell him, but Dirk did say there may be a clue in high quality cinematics we're seeing. So I don't know if that means one that's coming out soon, since the beta's coming out. Maybe we'll see the full intro cinematic, or if that means the cinematic that's already out. I guess down below, let me know if you've seen the teaser cinematic or the launch cinematic, I guess is what it's called, and you feel like people are missing something. And I'm going to go back and actually take a look. So maybe we'll have that in an upcoming This Week in Godforge video. But as of now, I didn't see anything. All right, that's it for this week. If you like what I'm doing, think about giving me a subscribe and a thumbs up if you wouldn't mind. My new goal is to try and get to 50 subscribers. So thanks to those who have been helping me with that, and I'll see you next time. This has been HLock. Bye.